flavor and grape growing and winemaking. And the second reason is because if you all leave, then Jana's going to lord the numbers over us forever and make fun of us, and nobody wants that. So stick around and listen. So, anyways, that's me. I'm Dave Garrett. Rodolfo, introduce yourself.
Rodolfo Narati, co-founder of dVIN Labs and Club dVIN, our members only club side of the dVIN Labs, and I'm going to listen attentively to Dave's sort of framework for Argentine Malbec. I'm originally from Argentina. Dave and I met years ago in Argentina for the first time. So there's a lot of sort of intersections and coincidences here, and I have some of my own thoughts about Argentina and Malbec. He introduced me to some very cool producers that are still on my radar today. I have a bottle here. Dave, I don't know if you recognize this.
Finca Adelgiza?
Yeah.
That's the good stuff. I love Finca Adelgiza.
So Dave put the winemaker of that on my radar many years ago. And we have a drop for the members coming up tomorrow. So a lot of exciting stuff going on.
Why don't you tell us about that first?
Sure.
Like let's get that out of the way, and then we can do the geeky stuff.
Malbec it up. So tomorrow will be our next members only wine drop. We are featuring a unicorn wine, as I like to call them, and it is Champagne de la Motte, the 2007 collection, not to be confused with any of their other wines. This is incredibly hard to pin down and have access to. De la Motte is owned by, and the wine is made by the same folks that make Salon, Champagne Salon, arguably the most, you could argue it's one of the best champagnes in the world and one of the most collected and traded. So it's kind of an opportunity to drink Champagne Salon, made by the same enologist, and have access to it for probably half of what you'd pay for Salon. So we're really excited to have this opportunity to share it with the membership. And if you're not a member, reach out to us, because these wine drops are coming in hot.
It's the good stuff.
It is the good stuff. We don't do the other stuff.
So that's tomorrow. Big wine drop tomorrow, which we're excited about. So let's talk about Malbec. So first things first, and there will be a quiz at the end. Let's talk about where Malbec comes from. Rodolfo, my understanding is that you know a thing or two about wine. What some of you out there might not know is that Rodolfo is not only a WSET diploma holder, Wine and Spirits Education Trust, but also a candidate for the coveted Master of Wine, of which there are 350 people in the world with that title. So I know that we've had a couple of Wine Wednesdays where we've had some Masters of Wine. I think David Four was on a couple of weeks ago, but Rodolfo is in line for that very prestigious title at some point. I know that it takes a long time, but what can you tell us about Malbec, Rodolfo? Where's it from?
Well,
what do you do with it?
It has it has a, I don't know if I would say a disputed origin, but we know for sure it is it finds its origins as a blending varietal, blending grape in Bordeaux, on the left bank,
Also called
uh, and it's also called Cot,
Cot, right? Isn't it Cot?
C-O-T, in south uh, in the south of France, uh, um, and it makes so that's another area where they argue it comes from, not from Bordeaux, but from southwestern France. So uh, the as a single variety. So
Yeah.
those are its origins, and it has evolved a lot over time.
So blending varietal, actually, if memory serves, I think that the word Malbec in Gaelic, in ancient Gaelic,
Wow.
means bad in the mouth. Malbec, bad beak, bad in the mouth. So mal means bad, bec is beak or mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So Malbec was a blending grape. And they used it for color and they used it for tannins, I think. But you wouldn't drink a bottle of Malbec out of Bordeaux because it was, it tasted bad in the mouth. So what happened in Argentina?
Well, the opposite. It came over to Argentina like so many things. Argentine. It came over with immigration from Europe, uh, and Argentina championed the grape as as a single variety, a monovarietal. So they, in essence, have defied uh, um, what Dave just mentioned, the idea that uh, it's only suitable for blending. Uh,
Yeah. So apparently the unique terroir of Argentina makes Malbec basically a totally different grape. Which again, pretty exciting, pretty interesting.
Now, two things can be true. I would argue Malbec remains a superlative blending varietal. Uh, um,
Yeah.
it really does, even though Bordeaux has ironically uh, now uses minuscule amounts of Malbec compared to
What it used to do, right?
what
Yeah.
it used to. Uh, and um, you know, even though it's the hallmark variety of Argentina, uh, it's certainly not. It's not a one-trick pony for Argentina. Argentina is really thriving with other varieties and with blends. So
Yeah. So here's something interesting. Um, uh, I've been fortunate enough to be, kind of do deep dives in winemaking in two different places in the world. One of them is in the Uco Valley in Argentina. I spent about 10 years there. We built a vineyard and a winery there. And the other is in the Priorat in Spain. And you couldn't really think of two different terroirs, right? Argentina is big, wide, open spaces, giant, 20-hectare vineyards, um, and the and pretty, high elevation in Mendoza because you're getting close to the Andes, but relatively flat. It's not hilly. It's kind of this alluvial. It's like, this big plain or it's the the what they call um the curtain of the mountain that kind of slopes down from the Andes to the plains of Argentina.
that's because
And
it's
the
so high
Priorat,
already, the altitude.
that's right. That's right. And in the Priorat, it's like, lots of little hills and lots of twists and turns. And, you can have a 2-acre vineyard here and then a 2-acre vineyard on the other side of the hill. and those two things get totally different sun, totally different humidity, totally different. It's like two different terroirs 10 feet from one another. And the Priorat is full of licorea, which is this sort of slate schist, black schist soil, very, very mineral rich. And Argentina is more rocky, sandy, alluvial soil. And by learning about wine in those two places, I really learned a lot about terroir. So let me tell you, and what I want to talk about today is Argentina, and like this little this is a little vignette that I tell all the time. Uh, uh, you if you've listened to me before, you might have heard it. Rodolfo has certainly heard it before, and Rodolfo is going to be nice to me, and he's not going to correct all of the things that I get technically and scientifically wrong. But basically, what's cool about Argentina, especially the Uco Valley, is that it's kind of like they created conditions for making wine in a lab. So when you make wine, there's a bunch of things that you need to do. One thing is you need to have, and you've probably heard this, coming out of Napa Valley, you need warm days and cool nights. What that really means is that you need um, uh, 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 volatility in the temperature. You need thermal amplitude, right? The swing between the hottest part of the day and the coldest part of the night needs to be big. And you also need to have you need access to fresh, clean water, but you need to be able to control the water, right? Because too much water and your grapes get too full of water, and you don't have concentrated wine. So you need all of these kind of really specific conditions, which is why they only make wine in a few places in the world, right? There's maybe 13 places in the world, I think, that are called the Great Wine Regions, where you can make fine wine they make wine everywhere in the world, but when you consider fine wine, I think there's only 13 places in the world that are considered to be the Great Wine Regions. So the Uco Valley in Argentina, like I said, is kind of like it was built in a lab to make wine. It's technically a desert. I think it has less rainfall than any other wine region. I think it has less rainfall than any other wine region in the world. Technically a desert, and here's why: because it's right on the eastern side of the Aconcagua, which is the tallest mountain in the Americas. Right, North and South America, the tallest mountain is Aconcagua. It's 13,000 meters. It's huge mountain, and all the weather that's coming from the west to the east gets stuck in the Andes. And so while it never ever rains, like almost never in the Uco Valley, just a few days a year, it rains in the mountains every night. So it's never cloudy. You get sun every day, and it never rains, but you have unlimited access to fresh, clean water because it snows in the mountains every night, and then that snow melt runs down the mountain, and you've got access in the streams, the rivers, and then the aquifers to the freshest, cleanest water in the world. We had a stream that ran through our vineyard in the Uco Valley, and we used to say all the time when people come to visit, we'd be like, we'd put champagne in the water, and they'd say, "Oh wow, this water's really cold," and we're like, "Yeah, well, it was snow like 3 minutes ago, right? Like it just melted 3 minutes ago up there, and now it's here." So like that's pretty interesting, and having access to fresh, clean water, but you have complete control over how much water goes into your vines. That's really important. The other bit is the thermal amplitude. Also, the Uco Valley has one of the largest thermal amplitudes in all of in any winemaking region, right? Because it's tilted almost like you would tilt a, how solar panels, when you see solar panels, they're always kind of like tilted to the sun. Well, that slope off Aconcagua, off the Andes in the Uco Valley, is the exact slope that you would put a solar panel on. So like perfect sun, perfect perfect sun, and it's very very hot in the middle of the day during the growing season. It gets up to over 100 degrees nearly almost every day. But when the sun goes down over the Andes, and because you're at such a high elevation, it's very, very cold at night. I've been there when that thermal amplitude is in the middle of the day at 40 degrees Celsius, which is maybe 100, 103, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And then at night, it gets down to the 40s, 45 degrees Celsius. So like, what is that? Like 6 degrees Celsius? So like a 25 degree Celsius swing in thermal amplitude. That's enormous. It's huge. And then the other thing you have is you have this alluvial, rocky, sandy soil. Now, why is that important? Well, the way that a vine feeds the grape is by sucking water up through the soil and delivering it to the grape, right? That's how any fruit grows, is that the tree or the vine that it's on brings water up through the soil and then delivers it to the grape, and then that's how the grape or any fruit grows during the growing season. Well, the root system is really important. It's you can kind of have two different root systems, right? Like on the one end, a root system can be like a carrot, one big thick root. On the other end, the root system can be like a vine. So very, very deep and very complex root system. What you want to have is lots and lots of little tendrils, and you want them to go super deep. When you see a vine in a vineyard, it's like an iceberg. You're seeing just the tip of the iceberg, and everything underground is typically this very, very complex and deep root system. And we'll get into why that is in a minute. But depending on what your soil is like, if you've got soil that is rocky, sandy, where the water drips through the soil very quickly, what that means is that the tendrils of your vines will chase the water, right? They'll go and try to find the water. That's how vines grow. So if water pools up near the top of the surface of the vineyard, you won't have a very deep or complex root system. But if you've got sandy soil, the water flows through, and then you create this huge, very deep and complex root system. And here's why that's important. Because when the water flows up from the roots to the grape, it's not like a straw. It's not like the water goes inside the root and travels up through the vine to the grape. The water actually travels alongside these tendrils, alongside the root system. So the more deep and complex your root system is, the more contact that water gets with all of the minerals in the soil on its way up to the grape, right? If it was just one big, like carrot, you wouldn't get as much contact with the soil. But because you got this deep, complex root system, much more contact with the soil, the more contact with the soil, the more minerals are delivered from that soil to the grape, right? That all makes sense? So in Mendoza, especially in the Uco Valley, you sort of have these perfect growing conditions. It's perfect. It's, perfect thermal amplitude, unlimited access to fresh, clean water, but full control over that. 320 days of sunlight a day. So perfect growing conditions. And you've got this soil that creates a deep and complex root system for the delivery of the water to the grape. And then, because of all of those factors, What happens during the growing season is actually relatively simple to understand. There's a grape on the vine. The sun hits that grape, and the water inside the grape evaporates, right? So it condenses, and it condenses on the outside, and then it eventually evaporates. So what happens is that grape, the water evaporates, and it shrinks. The grape shrinks a little bit during the hottest part of the day. And then at night, when it's cold, that grape expands. And as it expands, it sucks up the water from the soil that again travels alongside the root system, and then it gets delivered to that grape. And that happens every day, right? It contracts because the water evaporates, and then it expands and brings more water up through the root system into that grape. So, and it keeps doing that every day. It expands, contracts, expands, contracts. And that does two things. One thing is it makes the juice inside that grape more concentrated, more full of minerality every day, right? Because the minerals don't evaporate, only the water evaporates. So every day it's delivering more minerals along with the water, and then the water evaporates, and then more minerals, and the water evaporates. It's like, boiling down a soup, right? Or boiling down a sauce. It gets thicker and more concentrated. And the second thing that happens is that grape expands and contracts. Sorry about the balloons. Expands and contracts, expands and contracts. And what that does is it toughens the skin of the grape. So think about your elbow, right? Your elbow is the thickest and toughest skin certainly on your arm, right? And I think on your body. I think it's the toughest skin on your body is in your elbow. It's the thickest and the toughest. And that's because you're doing this all the time, right? So you've got thick skin on your elbow. Well, that's what happens on the grape. And what that does is it's the skin of the grape that if it's the thicker it is and the more the tougher it is, the more it'll deliver color and tannins to your wine. So it's basically like all of these environmental elements conspired together to create this perfect condition to make wine. And what I always say is that the Uco Valley is like a lab. It's basically a laboratory. You have perfect conditions, and you can grow the perfect grape in the Uco Valley. The problem that I always had with it, well, I didn't have a problem while I was there, but then when I left and I went to the Priorat, what I realized is that the soil in the Uco Valley is, while it's kind of perfect for vineyards and it's perfect for those root systems, it doesn't have that terroir character that you can get in other places of the world, in the Priorat, for example, or in Bordeaux or in Burgundy. And so when I kind of think about old world versus new world sometimes, or certainly when I think about Argentina versus old world wines, what I think a lot is, you can get perfect growing conditions, but what it lacks, and the reason that you have relatively few kind of investment grade wines coming out of Argentina, is that it does lack that terroir, that special, unique terroir. And Rodolfo, tell me how I'm wrong about that. I think that that's how I think about it. That's kind of how I was taught while I was there. And for me, it's a really good shorthand to sort of understand how wine grapes are grown and how wine is made from grapes.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's also underscored by the fact that uh, you know all of Mendoza has one DOC or AOC, right? So in any other place that big, you'd have a lot of appellations or sub-growing areas that are defined and stated on the bottle. But you have to be able to prove real differentiation in order to do that. And there's more uniformity than there is differentiation, as Dave pointed out. And whereas there's there in Priorat, I would say there's there can be more variation, even though, like Dave said, Licorea is the dominant soil, and it really provides the wines with an incredible sense of place, because there's really few other places like it. You can find some instances in Germany, but Priorat is primarily a red wine, and Germany's primarily white. So Dave nailed
Anyway, that's my Malbec story. But that said, I drink an awful lot of Malbec. I certainly in Argentina. I was there for 10 years, and we drank a ton of Malbec. Malbec is great with Argentine asado. Even on my birthday every year, wherever I am in the world, we make sure and go to a great Argentine steakhouse, and I always order a bottle of Malbec. And I do pretty frequently. I would say a couple of times a year. We'll go out and find a great Argentine restaurant. It's a little bit tough here in Spain to get good Malbec. I can get a lot more of it when I visit Argentina or when I'm in the States, but it's a little bit hard to get here. What are your favorites that you get in Boston?
Oh boy, certainly anything by the famed Carmelo Patti. So um, Familia Margheriti, and there's there's uh, there's fairly good diversity in the States, and it's not just the boutique wines, but I mean, larger producers are doing some, because they have the resources, doing some. Sorry about that. Doing some really interesting work. The Zuccardi family, the Catena family, at the mid to high end, they're just pushing boundaries that haven't been pushed before in Argentina. So they're making some pretty impressive wine.
I agree with that. I'm a big fan of Santiago Archibald. And anything
Yes,
he makes,
100%,
I'm a big fan.
100%.
And I'm going to tell you a story about Carmelo Potti. Do you want to hear the story? Do you know Carmelo?
I I did meet him. Yes, once or twice.
So Carmelo Potti is a very very famous winemaker in Argentina, Mendoza, and his story goes something like this. He was when he was 1 year old, his family boarded a boat from Sicily to come to Argentina, and halfway over, his parents both died. And so he was just sort of there with a bunch of other families. He was 1 year old; he doesn't even remember, but he was an orphan and kind of was brought into Argentina. This was, I'm gonna say 85, 90 years ago. Probably he's probably 90 by now. So brought over to Argentina. The family was a winemaking family, the family that kind of took him in, and so they all left for Mendoza, and they were and in Mendoza, that family was, they were vineyard workers, and they were working in the vineyards. And Carmelo, by the time he was 5 years old or 6 years old, was working harvest. By the time he was 10, he was like, they called the capo of the harvest, meaning he was the guy that when the workers brought the baskets of grapes to the truck, or the wagon at that time, he would say, all right, that's okay. And he would pay, because what they would do is they would pay, usually it's 1 peso for every basket of wine. For every basket of wine that when you go out and harvest, you bring the basket of wine to the thing, and you get paid for every basket that you bring in. And he was the kid at 10 years old that was trusted to pay the guys, and to be essentially the capo of the harvest. By the time he was 20, he was working as a winemaker. By the time he was 25, I think, maybe 28, he was I think he was the head winemaker for what's the name? It's a pretty famous winery in Argentina. I can't remember the name, and I apologize. But he became he was a head winemaker for one of their brands, then became the head winemaker for the whole company for a long time. But Carmelo didn't come from any money. He was an orphan. And in Argentina, winemakers are it's a great job, but it's not a very high paying job. So he never really had the ability to put money away. And although investors had come to him and said, if you want to start a brand, I'd be willing to invest in a winery or a vineyard. He always wanted to do it on his own. He didn't want investors. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. He was very, very stubborn, and very focused on quality. And I think his first vintage was 1997, where he finally saved up enough money to buy his own little vineyard, and his own winery. Now, that winery was very, very small and very, very old, all concrete tanks. And so his first vintage, he made, I think he made 1 tank of Malbec and 1 tank of Merlot and 1 tank of Cabernet Sauvignon. He's actually pretty famous for the Cabernet Sauvignon. And the way the story goes is, like, this was his last dollar. He was, when I met him, he'd owned his own winery for more than 10 years and was still driving a 25-year-old truck. So the story goes that he was with some of his winemaker friends, and they were tasting his first vintage. And he went through and he was tasting, and he tasted the Malbec and said, oh, this is okay. And he tasted the Merlot and he said, this is okay. And then he tasted the Cabernet and said, no, it's not right. And he opened the valve and let all the wine go down the gutter. 20,000 liters of wine. His first vintage. That money was like the money to keep him afloat. Even if he didn't want to put his name on it, he could have sold it to any of those guys, like any of the other winemakers that were standing there with him. Were like, what are you doing? And he's like, no, it's not right. I don't want this to be my first wine. And that's something that's really well documented with Carmelo, because if you ever find a bottle of Carmelo Patti, which is hard to find in most places, but if you find it, they're almost always old vintages. And the reason they're old vintages is because even though he needs the money, and even though he, every vintage he gets by the hairs on his teeth, he will not release a wine until it's ready to drink. So on his property at the vineyard, it's relatively small vineyard, relatively small winery, but he has a giant warehouse with vintages and vintages and vintages of wine that, he needs the money, but he's not willing to sell. And, for me, that's just a really great story. So if you find
Absolutely.
a bottle of Carmelo Patti anywhere in the world, hold on to it. It was well loved by the winemaker, and was only released because he was sure it was perfect. So
that's a dying breed of winemaker.
Yeah, no joke.
These folks, they're very rare, because of the commercial reasons that Dave laid out. It obviously just doesn't make any sense. But you still have some holdouts like Patty, who don't release till it's ready, and sometimes even don't release in order, because vintages aren't ready to drink necessarily in the order, in the sequential order that they were produced in. So, yeah, these inspirational stories from the industry.
Anyway, I think that's enough for today. Anything else you
Yep.
want to say, Rodolfo?
Proud to be Argentine at a moment like this, and I'll leave it at that. And members, keep your eyes peeled tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. And if the drops are catching your attention, like others, I've gotten some emails from folks interested in membership. Please do reach out to us, and we'd be happy to have you.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Wine Wednesday. Drink good wine, and thank you all for sticking around until the end, so that we don't have to be embarrassed with Jana. So I appreciate everybody. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.